So the title of my program is A History of the Paleontology section at Mississippi Museum of Natural Science. And my initial slide here shows our current and former directors collecting fossils at two locations in Mississippi. Where we first started collecting together, where Charles and I were first collecting in Tibby Creek, south of West Point, Mississippi. They were scuba diving, as Charles says, for fossils, mostly Ice Age fossils. Although they brought up a mixture of Ice Age and Cretaceous fossils. And this is a shot of our current director pulling. It's hard to see; it's a scanned image, but our current director is pulling up the mastodon jaw that sits over his head in the director's office.
I didn't expect to see that today.
We did not. But Libby did know that I was going to show a slide of hers. Did she make it back from the back? Where's Libby? Oh, okay, there we go. Yeah, she's still in the back. So that's her collecting the gravel bars on the Mississippi River, also looking for Ice Age fossils and Paleozoic gravel fossils. Now, when I was coming up with this slideshow, commemorating 40 years, which will be next year, 2018, 40 years of paleontological research and outreach and education here at the Museum of Natural Science. I thought about gimmicky ways using 40, say at the Fossil Roadshow, various events where I might have, or even during the week, displaying 40 fossils that were all donated by 40 donors, using that theme of 40. I'm going to start with a list of 40 things today that are prehistoric species or groups of species. So some of these up here, these 40 species or these 40 fossil types here include individual species like the mastodon. Oh, you can't see my cursor, can you? Mastodon is an individual species. We had one mastodon represented in Mississippi's fossil record, one mammoth. There are at least two, possibly three Ice Age horses, which are fully modern horses. We call these equine horses. But we also had three-toed horses. We have at least one species, possibly two. This is a group of 40 different things. Among the baculited ammonites, we had multiple species of these. So some of these, again, represent multiple species, but 40 things. But I just chose these things off the top of my head. I didn't include everything. I mean, there's more than 40. I have sea turtles are not even up there. Our extinct species of turtles are not. Our extinct families of turtles are not even up there. There are several things that are not up there. What is the most obvious thing that is not up there?
The whale.
The whale is right here. The whale should be up there. Basilosaurid whales. That includes Zygorizes, Syntheocetus, and Basilosaurus. They're all Basilosaurid family. What is the obvious thing that's not up there? Sheena already knows, so she's not allowed to answer. I gave it away earlier. John Davis, yes.
Equine?
I've got a few up there. Yeah, this is one of the groups I work on, Valgesi land urchins. What is not up there that should be up there? Thank you, Mary. And she did not hear me talking about that. That was Mary's voice, wasn't it? I should recognize it anyway. Yeah, dinosaurs are not up there. So this slide is attempting to convey that the Mississippi fossil record is not just about dinosaurs, as most 4 to 8 year old kids think. But I get so many questions about dinosaurs. We only have one youngster in here today. But so now you know. What is your name? So now you know it wasn't just about dinosaurs in Mississippi's paleontological past. Well, this is our program outline. I'll cover it in 4 parts. We'll go over a little bit about the early history of fossil collecting in Mississippi, early paleontology, if you will, the Road to a Paleontology program at MMNS, the MMNS Paleontology Curators. There have been 3 of us, and what does MMNS Paleontology do? The history is missing Libby's input, but I'm hoping she'll fill in some gaps. I never got to interview her before I gave the slideshow, but she already did before the show. She was telling me that Ms. Cook sent whale fossils to the Smithsonian, to Remington Kellogg. who published a whale monograph back in the 1930s. So she's got more information, and I hope to get it from her. With regard to early history of fossil collecting begins, I'll talk about 4 different people. We'll go through them relatively quickly. Thomas Hutchins published this book in 1784, An Historical Narrative and Topographical Description of Louisiana and West Florida. And it contains information on Mississippi's fossils, among other things. And it's not just Mississippi territory. These are fossils actually found inside the boundaries of the current state of Mississippi. And these fossils, they're not named specifically, but the way he describes them, he is talking about fossils, Hutchins is, around the Vicksburg area, north of Vicksburg, the little town of Redwood. And he's talking specifically about early Oligocene deposit called the Byram Marl. So he doesn't mention any of these specifically, but we know because of the terms he's using, he's talking about this formation called the Byram Marl. And in this shot of the marl, and Hutchins probably saw the same things, it's a little out of focus, but it's filled with little arc shells, which are so typical of the marl, seashells. The next guy I wanted to just briefly cover was this guy, Montreuil Dickinson. Montreuil was a resident removed to Natchez. Hutchins also lived in Natchez for a number of years, but Montreuil Dickinson resided in Natchez for several years and did a lot of fossil collecting, Native American grave digging, which is illegal today. This is all before organized archaeology. He was also a famous numismatist. He was kind of a jack of all trades, but he primarily studied Indian mounds, but one of the main reasons he moved to Jackson was to dig up a mastodon. Then there is the Mississippi Geological Survey, and its very first assistant geologist, and I say assistant geologist, that's only in name. He was actually functionally the de facto geologist. He did all of the field work Wales did. Again, our very first, and again I can say it, our very first active geologist and de facto geologist for the state. He went around, did a lot of mapping and fossil collecting, and he collected mastodon remains and other Ice Age fossils in the Natchez area. And Wales communicated with a guy in the 1850s by the name of Dr. William Spillman in Columbus. His home is still standing today. It's on the tour of homes, if you're ever up there doing the tour of homes in Columbus. It's called Beckrome. But Dr. Spillman was a medical doctor, and he was kind of a jack of all trades too. A lot of these early guys that were out there collecting fossils, they did lots of things. They were sort of Renaissance men of their day. But Wales and Dickinson and Spillman went far abroad to collect things. Spillman discovered the first published dinosaur bone from Mississippi and exhibited the first Basilosaurus material ever from Mississippi that we know is definitely from Mississippi at the 1884 World Expedition in New Orleans. And then there's Joseph Leidy, to whom Wales sent specimens to for identification, as did Spillman. Spillman sent specimens to Leidy. Most of what Leidy received was from Spillman. But Leidy was a pioneer in modern parasitology and protozoology and considered the father of American vertebrate paleontology. He received many biological and paleontological specimens from Spillman over the years, including dinosaur bones, marine reptile bones, and Leidy received a bone from, I think it was a riverboat captain, to turn this bone over to a local medical doctor in Natchez. And this bone was ultimately conveyed to the American Philosophical Society, which was based out of the, what we now know today as Philadelphia Academy of Natural Sciences, although Drexel University has it in their possession now. But this bone is a very interesting bone, and it came to be very interesting, and it has quite a history behind it. This particular bone was a jawbone, and Dr. Leidy here was rendered permanently in bronze holding this bone. Now, Dr. Leidy accomplished many things throughout his career. He could have been immortalized holding all manner of things, although I gave away the slideshow there. This is really touch sensitive. All I'm doing is hovering my hand over the board. You should see my hand right now. It's just I'm over the board here. Well, now, I was not even near the board. Donald, does my stomach stick out so much that it's hitting the touchpad? Or I know I don't have timings on this. Anyway, so this is the jawbone here after it was cleaned. It was only cleaned recently, but when Leidy was holding it, it was covered. Here it goes again. It is wanting me to hurry up, obviously. But yes, this jawbone is from the American lion. It's the very first American lion ever found in the New World. There were early reports of lions loose in the New World, loose somewhere out west. These were kind of popularized based upon Thomas Jefferson's first original misinterpretation of what giant ground sloth remains belonged to. The Megalonyx jeffersoni was originally thought to be the remains of a giant lion, but later that proved not to be the case. But later on, right here in Natchez, Mississippi, the very first lion fossils were found. And we have a cast of this, and this is actually a picture of our cast. And it was only cleaned recently. When Leidy was holding it, it was encased in a concretion. But that's kind of neat. If you're ever up there at the Philadelphia Academy of Sciences, that's where his statue stands, and you should take note of what he's holding there and impress your companion with you. Or the director of the museum, who probably doesn't know. The Road to a Paleontology program at MMS. The creation of the MMS Paleontology program is largely influenced by the work of the Mississippi Gem and Mineral Society. They still work closely with us today. This is two of the founders, husband and wife founders, Wendell and Martha Johnson. They conceived the idea of the society and developed it with friends in their home. The roots of the MNS Paleontology program also are tied to not just the Gem and Mineral Society, but many members of the public, concerned members of the public. Now, originally, it was thought that there would be a geology museum where rocks and fossils could be displayed alongside, rocks and minerals could be displayed alongside fossils. And here, William H. Moore, current state geologist in the 60s and 70s, had made a comment in a newspaper. Mississippi has a wealth of fossil, mineral, and rock materials that are as beautiful and important academically as any place in the world. And we have no place to display this material. And one of the things, perhaps the big thing that inspired everyone, all these forces, the Gem and Mineral Society, the public, the MMNS Foundation, and other museum entities to create a program here, was the discovery of this skeleton of a Zygorrhiza, 65-70% complete skeleton, in 1971. Of course, the program didn't come along until 1978. But these bones were recovered by the Gem and Mineral Club, and here's a magazine article showing some of the digging, close-up of one of the jawbones in situ. And the club worked real hard in getting these bones out, doing the initial preservation and displaying them in their, I forget where they were initially displayed, but ultimately some of the bones came to the Museum of Natural Science. Again, the program came into existence in 1978. The first fossil was accessioned in 1971, as I remember correctly. It is a whale rib. Organized from previously donated Mississippi specimens, some staff collected samples. The J. Magruder Sullivan, he was a geologist at the Millsaps College, and he maintained a big collection there and eventually went to the old Capitol Museum. And there were many fossils that the original paleontologist that was employed here, Mike Fraser, brought from Florida. Also lots of skeletons from Florida too for our comparative osteological collection. The collection grew considerably with Les and Sue Pitts, some of the founders of the Gem and Mineral Society, and two separate donations. I made a small donation in 1994, but made up for it in a huge donation in 2002. Did I not, Scott? Did Scott ever make it? Oh, there he is. And the collection continues to grow thanks to the fossil collecting community. Now, for our first curator, Mike Fraser, a lot of his activity was devoted to creating a procedure for accessioning and cataloging of fossils into the collection, including things like preservation. He borrowed largely from the Smithsonian cataloging system at the time. I still use the same cataloging system today. Another thing that occupied Mike's time was Ziggy, getting that Zygoryza skeleton that was found 7 years earlier, getting it preserved and erected and on display at the museum. But there was a lot of fundraising going on at that time. They had a race, and this t-shirt I think was part of the race, or maybe it was a separate from the race, but I think there was a race to help raise money to fund Zygoryza. And the MMS Foundation at the time played a large role in it, and there's one of our early foundation members, second from the left up there, next to Mike, who was on the far left. But Mike got a lot of publicity out of it, the museum got a lot of publicity out of it, and a lot of his time was devoted to Zygoryza, as you can tell from these newspaper stories. And in the early 1980s, 1981, the Senate concurrent resolution adopted, because of the fame surrounding this fossil whale skeleton from Yazoo County, which affectionately became known as Ziggy, as you all know, most of you know. This inspired this legislation, for which the Gem and Mineral Society and other people campaigned to adopt Zygoryza, or Ziggy, as our state fossil. Here's Mike in the field, bivouacked outside of Quitman, Mississippi. It was on this journey that he was looking for, I think, the earlier whales at this time. He'd already worked with the Basilosaurids, but he was on the trail of earlier whales and finding the location of the Titanothere skull that you see on display downstairs, which is a J. Magruder Sullivan discovery. Mike was also preoccupied, as many of the museum folks were at the time, with recovering from the 1979 flood. Mike's graduate work was on porcupines, and of course he was disappointed when he started going to work in our Ice Age deposits in Mississippi and found no porcupine material whatsoever, but that was on his mind, to find the southernmost extent of porcupines in the Ice Age record of the Southeast. What he did find in his exploration of Ice Age deposits in northeastern Mississippi were two among many different interesting Ice Age critters, but these two in particular, which are no longer found in the Gulf Coastal Plain. They're limited to the Appalachians and points further north, colder climates, the southern bog lemming and meadow vole. Mike published a few things on Mississippi paleontology during his brief tenure here, his 3 years or so, including an article in the Mississippi Geology Quarterly entitled Archaeocetes, Whale-like Mammals from the Eocene in Mississippi. Not long after I started working here, I had heard that Mike fell off the paleontological grid. He wasn't doing paleontology anymore. And the former director, Libby, knows, and I think Charles knows, and other people know, that I spent many months looking for him, tracking him down. But he went off grid, and I eventually located him north of Dallas running a horse farm. And we started a correspondence and talked about various things, why he left paleontology, and we won't get into that. But he did pay me a visit when he was going to a reunion at the University of Florida to work with some of to visit with some of his buddies that were in a paleontology program that was associated with the University of Florida called the Timberland Research Organization. On to our second curator, Eleanor Daly. Dr. Daly was a graduate of the University of Kansas. She was our only PhD in the paleontology program. She went to work right away where Mike left off in the whale campaign. And she was also digging up her own whales, including this type specimen here in these two photographs to the far right of Cynthia cetus, a type species, our very first type species in the collection. Not just a type species, but a type genus of whale. Found just northwest of Jackson at the little intersection of Cynthia. And I think some of our staff members, Bob Jones was involved in this particular excavation. It was in an old limestone quarry. I think Bob has a story to talk about that expedition. She also dug up a whale just outside of Madison, Mississippi, and in the lower right-hand corner, or lower left-hand corner, there's a shot of her digging up the mastodon whose tusks sit in the exhibits today, the mastodon that was found beneath the old Pemberton Mall at Vicksburg. Her body of work, though, has largely to do with her graduate work and undergraduate work at the University of Kansas in Lawrence. She worked primarily on lower vertebrates. No offense, you herpetologists out there, and fish guys. But mostly from the Permian period. She worked on some fishes. And she was assisted in the whale reconstruction by Ken Carpenter, who was with us for several months, I guess, in 1982, doing a large body of whale reconstruction and mounting in the iron framework. That's a drawing of Zygorrhiza that Ken made while he was here. And eventually it was mounted in 1983. And here's Ken today. Ken is still practicing. Unlike Eleanor and Mike, he became a rather quasi-famous paleontologist, especially among dinosaur paleontology circles. He is now at Eastern Utah State, formerly the College of Eastern Utah, and works on stegosaurs and other interesting and fascinating dinosaurs. This newsletter, this old version of the museum newsletter, I forget how far it goes back, but this is one of the earlier issues, 1992, that's promoting our state fossil and how special it is. It's been 10 years by this time since they found the fossil, since it was mounted, 20 years since it was discovered, and it still hasn't worn off its novelty and still doesn't today. I mean, it's very iconic in the history of the paleontology program and with respect to Mississippi fossils, and we use it as an icon in much of our media. Eleanor eventually wrote an article on Zygorrhiza that was published in Mississippi Geology Quarterly. And while she was, the following year, Eleanor and the other staff put together, I guess, the very first really nicely organized exhibit of fossils, including a tusk that I don't know the whereabouts of, and that was one of the questions I had for you, Libby, is where this particular tusk is in this picture. I assume it was taken or returned to its owner, but it's not one of the tusks from downstairs. And eventually, we're skipping the 1990s, much of it anyway, and moving on to the new museum that was constructed in 2000. And Ken Carpenter, the person who mounted the Zygorrhiza skeleton initially, he came back for the move of Ziggy to her new location. And here's a list of people that played a large role in the development of our fossil wall, which we call Stories in Stone. We're very proud of it. I'm proud of it to this day. It's a wonderful teaching tool. So many of the people that are still here, or so many people that were involved in the construction of it have retired and since moved on. But our director, Charles Knight, of course, he played a large role in composing this and visualizing it, and it's such a wonderful tool. And I get excited every time I take a group down there to show it off. Sam Biebers, who came back to us, he was with us in the 90s, and he came back to us about 4 years ago now, and he was doing some of the early illustrations for the fossil wall when it was undergoing construction. Now, I'm going off topic a little bit and showing you some fossils. I want to remind you, if you've never seen gravel fossils, I want to remind you what they look like. It's a very ubiquitous and ubiquitous, a lot widely occurring everywhere type of fossils. Very accessible. We use them to teach paleontology to the young kids. We have gravel exercises at the Fossil Roadshow. The Mississippi Gem and Minerals Society has had gravel fossil hunt exercises in the past, and it's integral to the fossil collecting history of Mississippi since it's so abundant and occurs everywhere. And you can find some fascinating marine macroinvertebrates in it, including these brachiopods, or this one brachiopod here, the base of a crinoid here, or the top, I forget, the base, I guess. And it's largely limited to impressions, but sometimes internal molds of the specimen. Well, this is my segue to yours truly, the third paleontology curator, because although I didn't officially start collecting fossils in an organized way until I was about 14, My dad did introduce us to fossils in the driveway when I was much younger. So we were in northeastern Mississippi, and those gravels, although not quite as rich as the gravels, or not quite as fossiliferous as the gravels in western Mississippi, they nonetheless contain fossils. Now, I've lost track of all those fossils I found when I was a kid. I probably threw them at my brother, who was seated at my right, or at my cousin, who was seated at the rear left. But I loved fossils. Even in family photos, apparently I was always looking for fossils. I imagine, or my mother does, that the cameraman is going like this with a fossil and trying to get my attention. I was not only a fossil collector back then, I collected all kinds of things. I was a rockhound, essentially, and that's how much of the Mississippi Gem and Mineral Society Club considers themselves as rockhounds, always out there picking up different kinds of rocks. And I was very much interested in amateur archaeology, or collecting arrowheads, as I guess is the basics there. But I did it in an organized fashion with the Tom Bigby chapter of the Mississippi Archaeological Association. And this was a couple of years after I made a really interesting discovery of an artifact that was used to hunt Ice Age animals. And we were showing it off at one of the meetings of the club, where my old pal Wilkie Collins was doing a flint knapping demonstration. And so well into the 90s, I collected fossils a lot. This is a shot of me in front of my display case, picture taken by a friend of my stepmom's at the time. We did an article in the local magazine. And I went for a long period where I didn't collect many fossils at all, because I was trying to concentrate on my studies for my undergraduate work. But in 1999, when I enrolled at NCSU, instead of going to orientation that day and buying all my books and everything, I helped with a mammoth skeleton that came in from out west, and was assembling that, I think, that whole weekend. I want to draw your attention to one of our principal donors that I've been working with for the last several years, since he walked in the door in 2008 with parts of a four-legged whale, one of the most important fossil discoveries in the state, and that's Jeff McCraw. A lot of you have heard me talk about Jeff before. You've seen him come and go in the museum lobby. Jeff is seated behind a whale skull you see embedded in the bank of this stream in Yazoo County. He'd only seen part of it exposed, and he removed the gravel from around it to see the whole thing. And like my predecessors, who all dug up whales, ergo, I had to dig up a whale, and that's me showing the rear section here, trying to provide the force to pry the skull out of its earthen tomb. I've kind of published all over the place. I'm interested in all kinds of organisms. This is a sampler of some of the things I've published in the last 3 or 4 years. I love working with the precursors of sand dollars, irregular echinoids called lamp urchins. They're one of my favorites. I don't know why. But I've worked with fossil crabs. In fact, the past couple of years I worked with fossil crabs, as well as index fossils, fossils used to age deposits, and bryozoans, which are a type of microfossil, although they come together in a colony that you can see with the naked eye. But one of the things I'm most proud of, because it got a lot of publicity as we leaked it, is Chip Ward over here to my right, our videographer for the agency. He helped launch this somewhat prematurely, according to some of my colleagues in the paleontological community. So you should have published first and then had a news release, but we wanted to leak the information at the time. And the final publication is due to the presses in the next couple of weeks, so we'll hope the final product will be published before the end of May on the first horned dinosaur from the eastern US. It is the third discovery of a beaked dinosaur. All horned dinosaurs are beaked, not all beaked dinosaurs are horned. Horned dinosaurs are a type of beaked dinosaur, therefore. So it's a third beaked dinosaur fossil from the eastern US, but it's actually the very first horned dinosaur. So big discovery, and we're hoping that will make Science Weekly once it's published. With respect to my outreach, I'm kind of all over the state, but mostly in central Mississippi and northeastern Mississippi. James Starnes and I, my colleague with the Mississippi Office of Geology, we're hoping to do more work and have been doing a little more work in South Mississippi, trying to explore some of the younger deposits, Miocene and Pliocene age. But when I first got here, a lot of my field work was concentrated in northeastern Mississippi. And the guy that wrote this article saw me in a ditch. Well, he saw my rear end sticking out of a ditch near, well, it's not really near anywhere. It's south of Pontotoc somewhere, south of a little community called Black Zion on some wagon-beaten road. And he pulled over and asked me what I was doing. And I told him what I was doing. He said, "No way." I said, yeah, that's what I'm doing. And so he proceeded to tell me there were other people who collected in the area, and that led me to a big network ultimately in the Pontotoc area. And I've been doing a lot of research up there since. But that, I owe Claude for that, starting that ball rolling. And of course, we can't get enough press for the dinosaur tooth. And my hometown newspaper did this story on the discovery last year. Donald? I think there's a fly on the camera lens. Anyway, you already knew they were coming. I mean, I warned you because of the earlier technical difficulties. A lot of my field work, as I said, involves, and has been since I've been here, central Mississippi and northeastern Mississippi. And the reason that is because of how rich the fossil and accessible the fossil deposits are in those regions. One of the areas we frequently collect is in Smith County at a particular lime pit called the Smith County Lime Pit. And this is us in the field. This is Peter, my volunteer, who unfortunately is not with us anymore. He's still alive, but he's not with us anymore, not with the program anymore. And this is us with a researcher from Queen's University in Ontario, Kingston, Ontario, and a guy from the Natural History Museum in London, looking for little tiny bryozoans. I often take youth volunteers out in the field, although it's been a while since we had a youth volunteer trip. Everyone's been so busy. But this is a shot with Ann and I, with our youth volunteers, coupled with the youth members of the Mississippi Gem and Minerals, North Mississippi Gem and Minerals Society. So I do a lot of work with the Gem and Mineral Societies in Mississippi. This is my partner in crime for at least much of central Mississippi and parts of northeastern Mississippi, James Starnes, there in the middle, with one of my volunteers from the earlier 2000s, Dana Link, who was a FEMA archaeologist and loved to collect fossils on weekend, and he collected and donated numerous things. And here's another volunteer from the past, Charles Williams. Here's an outcrop just outside of Starkville. It's hard to miss when you're taking 25 into Starkville. It's off to your right. There's a series of outcrops that are very fossil rich, and this is me with the American Museum of Natural History sponsored Brooklyn College team working the Cretaceous Tertiary boundary. And then every now and then I gotta take a rest. One of our biggest events is the M&S Fossil Roadshow, and there's been a couple of years where I think our attendance has outpaced other events in those years, I'm proud to say. It's holding steady, I think. It's between 600 to 800 attendees each year. But this is a chance for us to network with collectors via an event-based situation. We got John Davis, University of Mississippi, has been involved in it early on, as have other Mississippi institutions. Mississippi Office of Geology, James Starnes there with his oldest daughter. The Mississippi Gem and Mineral Society, but also the North Mississippi Club comes down every year now. And even the University of West Alabama, the University of Alabama, and even the McWane Science Center are involved to a limited extent now. Credit for the idea goes to John Davis, our docent, from at least back in the 2000s, at least since I've been here. I'm sure before I was here, he was volunteering for the program. And that's John over there. Don, I'll ask you to stand up. You look real comfortable right now. That's okay.
Shucks.
Shucks. And so he worked with some of our educators, Martha, a lot of you remember Martha, and others to get this show off the ground. And it's basically the initial design. We added a few nuances and more participants in the show, more institutional participants, and it's pretty fairly well attended. In 2009, or 2008 rather, MPB contacted us and said, you guys need to film this. This is a neat event. We could turn this into a show, and we'd like it part of a series that we'd like to launch. We'd like for it to be the pilot episode called Simply Science. Well, we did film it. The series never got off the ground, unfortunately. But it was filmed, and it was nominated for an Emmy, a regional Emmy anyway, in 2009. A lot of my outreach, as I said, is in northeastern Mississippi. We do get a lot of newspaper coverage for the events that I attend. A lot of these smaller museums, what we call heritage or history museums in the various counties. Almost every county has one to some extent or another. These heritage or history museums, 4 or 5 of them now are doing their own rock and fossil shows in those counties that are particularly rock and fossil rich. The week before the Fossil Road Show, I used the Mississippi Gem and Mineral Show, which is always the week before the Fossil Road Show, or vice versa. I used that show to promote the upcoming Fossil Road Show and the museum as well, of course. And I do a lot of talks for various institutions, University of Mississippi, Mississippi State University, many of these heritage museums, and I do some work with the Scouts. And I've hosted one professional meeting since I've been here. That was a couple of years ago. The meeting was in honor, I dedicated our document produced for the meeting to a mentor, my main mentor through the late 80s and early 90s, Dr. Jack Kay, who first introduced me to Ice Age fossils and Cretaceous fossils when I was a young thing. And the coolest thing about the meetings, of course, are the T-shirts, and I've been emphasizing that to Sheena. She's about to host her own meeting. You got to come up with a real cool design. I wasn't very artistic. Joy, this is your cue.
I guess I'm supposed to model the T-shirt.
Joy is wearing a vintage 2014 SEAVBT t-shirt. Someone asked me, why did we make the t-shirts in this, or produce the t-shirts in this ghastly neon yellow color? Well, if you've ever been hunting in a quarry trying to find your friends or somewhere out fossil collecting, and a lot of the quarries actually require a neon color, a color that stands out. So it was perfect for a paleontological meeting. Probably 70 to 80% of the people that came to the meeting have hunted a quarry where they needed a neon yellow or neon green or neon orange before they entered the quarry. So, Donald! There you go again. When does this ever happen? So I imagine those of you that are older, that are 50 and older, get this joke. But if you're younger than 50, you don't get this joke. This happened a lot in the old 35, the old carousel slideshows. Anyway, so that fell flat. All right, there we go. Thank you, Donald. So the youth volunteers are with me at least twice a year. Sometimes subsets of the club drive to the locations, but most of the time it's just adult volunteers. This is my second youth volunteer outing with Rebecca when she was head of the program. And now I ask you, this is the first question I present to you this noon, which one eventually went on to become a naturalist or biologist? Which one do you think? Pardon? The dirtiest one, obviously. I don't know what happened to the others. But the one on the right, if he didn't become a biologist or a geologist or some other type of naturalist, I will give everybody in this room $100. Just kidding. Now I want to focus on this person right here, Joy Rushing. In case you didn't see her when she was modeling the t-shirt, she will now stand again. She shows up in all my volunteer outings, arrow pointing to her, and also in the lab. She's in the lab with me 2 days a week when she comes in on time. I don't count the late days as a full day. But yeah, Joy Rushing has been integral to the program since it was, almost since I came on board. She came to me in February 2004 when I was soliciting volunteers through Rebecca, I guess, at the time. And she's been with me ever since. I haven't driven her away in spite of the periodic cursing in my lab when I drop something. I ask you, what's in a number? I have a number associated with Joy. How about 7,000 volunteer hours, to her credit. Although, Joy, you'll have to finish at least through mid-May because you've only got 6,971 right now. For that number to be accurate, you'll have to at least be here through mid-May. One of the great things about the Fossil Roadshow is we get donations. Now, I get donations in all kinds of circumstances. I go out and solicit donations. I'm not begging on the streets. I haven't reached that point. But I do sometimes beg. But at several of the Fossil Roadshows, we've had people donate fossils. This young lady donated a giant ground sloth jaw, a jaw of a very rare giant ground sloth species. So that was a big deal at last year's Fossil Roadshow. And a couple of years before that, believe it or not, this is one of over a dozen pictures. Every one of them, in every other one, this kid was looking that direction, and all the others, this kid was looking in that direction. But this was the best picture, so I finally got the family to be still, at least within reason, to shoot this fossil. This tooth is our largest, nearly complete crown of a giant marine lizard called a mosasaur in the entire collection. And the discovery and all the hands that tooth passed through before Michelle donated it to me is an interesting story of itself, but I won't bother you there. But I want to mention Jeff again. Jeff has donated so many fossils. I created a special donation case, a temporary case, for some of his Ice Age fossils in one of the Fossil Roadshow exhibits one year. But we've had a whole host of people donate fossils. And sometimes, occasionally, they offer it themselves, but most of the time I'm begging, or not begging so much. I am emphasizing the importance of these fossils and the significance of them and how we'd like to publish on many of them. And they're eventually guilted into donating the fossil, after a little bit. This is an interesting couple of donations. These two young ladies used to work in the gift shop. Terry Major, our former aquarist here at the museum, took them out fossil hunting in Wayne County one time, and they found a fossil deposit where they found these fossils on the Chickasha River. At the time, I thought this was a deer. It's a vertebra of a neck. It's one of the neck vertebrae, one of the main weight-supporting vertebrae for the head, and allows the head to turn. And then this rhino bone. And I thought it was a deer at the time. But apparently it wasn't. I was later to find out. So Terry described me where they were finding these things because these bones were unlike any bones that I'd ever seen before from Mississippi. So he described the location. A couple years went by, and James Starnes and I took a little boat trip down there with Terry. And he showed us the location where the bones were spilling out, but for whatever reason we didn't go to that location. We ended up getting caught in a thunderstorm, huddled in the trees on the bank for about 30 minutes or 45 minutes until the storm passed. For whatever reason, we didn't visit that location. And it wasn't until December of 2012 where Waynesboro resident reports on Facebook that he's found these fossils that look very similar to what these young ladies are holding right here. And I didn't know he was in Waynesboro. And I asked him where he is. He said, well, I found these in a creek in Waynesboro. And so we went down there and investigated, and it turns out to be one of the greatest fossil discoveries ever in the state of Mississippi. But we really didn't investigate it until some 9 or 10 years later, after these young ladies found these two pieces. But we've gotten at least a dozen and a half different terrestrial mammal species, a couple different amphibians, things that we've never found before and from a time period that has never been documented previously in Mississippi's fossil record. Now I want to focus my attention on this fellow right here in the sort of the center aisle. James, if you'll stand up. This is James Starnes with the Mississippi Office of Geology. He has been integral to not only our understanding of the geology, my understanding of the geology, particularly of Central and South Mississippi, but he's found and donated many of fossils, and he's one of the people I don't have to lean on. Unfortunately for David, because David would prefer those fossils stay with the survey. Speaking of David, there's David Dockery. David, if you'll stand. We might as well have you all stand. You'll have to remember from earlier in the slideshow, David was integral in creating our fossil wall downstairs. We have him to thank for all the beautiful mollusk shells down there. And we are, and David can talk about this at the lunch today or after the show, but we are envied around the world, particularly here in North America, for our preservation of mollusk shells in certain deposits in Mississippi. A brief note about this gentleman right here, Earl Manning. He's now retired, but he has an on and off relationship since the middle to late 80s with the Museum of Natural Science Paleontology collection. He used to come and help Eleanor identify fossils. He was kind of in and out, unnoticed at times, probably most of the time. He's no longer with us. Again, not dead, but he's in Davenport, Iowa. But I still communicate with him via email, and he's quite a bit of help. But his identifications and initials were on many labels in that collection when I took over the collection in 2003. And now with all the Mississippi Office of Geology staff just saying, no. There's Mike Bograd. I also like to point out Mike Bograd there. He's in the middle of this group, these guys right here. He's also in the middle of the slides. Mike, if you'll stand up. Mike is not only the head of the Office of Geology, he is a regular attendee of our noon lectures. In fact, he comes to more of our noon lectures than I do. I hate to confess. But no, Mike is always been a big supporter of the museum, and typically the first one to answer my emails, mostly because James is in the field or otherwise busy drilling, and David is just too busy. He's just ignoring me. We had David here speak several months ago, and he was promoting his book on the Mississippi geology, a long time coming, some 90, 85 years coming, an update to what we know about the geology and paleontology of the state. And it's a wonderful volume, only $80. They're for sale at the Mississippi Office of Geology, also through the University of Mississippi, and as always, Amazon.com. Now, I am going to thank Libby and Charles, all my begging over the years to expand the paleontology collection space. This is what I dealt with for the first 7 years, not quite 700 square feet devoted to paleontological prep work, cleaning, preservation, and then this is the collections area where we store all the catalog and other specimens. So I didn't have much space, and even my office, oh yeah, I was located in here at the time, and my tomb never saw trees or birds or anything unless they were fossilized. But eventually Libby and Charles made good, and much to Bob Jones's dismay, I got some of his space, some of his collection space, and some of his lab space as well. And now I have almost, not quite 3,000 square feet, some of which I share with Dr. Jones. A little bit about what's happened to the collection in the last 39 years. Initially, and Mike was only here 3 years, Mike devoted a lot of work to doing a lot of things, doing field work. He was starting a program from scratch, and not much was, in fact, nothing was really cataloged during that time. Although he did develop a cataloging system, and I still use that system today. Eleanor was here for the longest of the three of us. Not a lot got cataloged. She was digging up whales and helping Ken mount a whale. But when I first got here, I was devoted to cataloging things. In fact, the museum gave me a little money as a graduate student to begin cataloging specimens in the collection, particularly Pleistocene fossils, including a lot of things that Mike Fraser and Charles found, and Charles's diving crew found in the 90s. And so now we have quite a collection that we can brag about. 65,500 specimens as of last count, last month. The collection is divided into 6 different sub-collections: the vertebrate paleontology or bone collection, the invertebrate paleontology collection, mostly shells. And then we have these supportive collections, the comparative osteology collection and the zoology collection, marine invertebrate zoology collection. And we have a rock and mineral collection, the paleobotany collection. And all these are supportive of the paleontological collections. Again, the systems for cataloging these were largely created by Mike, but I did most of the cataloging in the last 14 years. So how much of this breaks down into staff collected material and donated material? Well, it is rather impressive. 39% of all the bones that are cataloged now, cataloged material, not what's uncatalogued. We got a lot of uncatalogued material, the same or if not more of uncatalogued material. So 39% of the bones, 24% of the mollusks and other invertebrates. 5 of 82 Mississippi counties are represented in the collection, all coastal plain state represented from Texas to New Jersey, although of course we focus on Mississippi, of course. And our type material includes these things. I picked these out as our most important type specimens, I think. You know, they're the ones I thought of off the top of my head. Of course, the whale, Syntheocetus maxwelli, that I mentioned earlier. The first species that I ever described, Harduinia saucieri. Another hard urchin described by University of Mississippi paleontologist Lou Zakos, and several other things. And yes, that's my name right there. A fossil was named after me. Unfortunately, it's an animal called ratfish. So you take what you can get. So in this last 2 or 3 slides, I'm going to ask you guys, what is Mississippi's most famous fossil? What do you hear about more often than the other fossils? Of course, as you hear about Ziggy most often. Again, she's an iconic specimen as specimens go. What I didn't say earlier on in the show is that Ziggy at the time, when she was discovered and when she was mounted, was considered the most complete skeleton of her kind ever mounted, of the genus Zygorizon and of the related genus Durodon. And it is believed that Zygorizon and Durodon may have a lot of overlap, and Ziggy may be Durodon, according to some paleontologists. But all that aside, among that type of whale, she was considered the most complete for the long time, until major excavations in Whale Valley in Egypt. I think they found more complete specimens of Ziggy over there since then. But she certainly is a beautiful and a rare breed in the sense that she was so complete. A lot of you are unaware that we often base species discoveries on 1 or 2 bones, sometimes a fragment of a bone or a fragment of a shell, when it's sufficiently diagnostic. I, on the other hand, and have placed a triptych outside providing some of the details to this discovery. But this is basically it in a nutshell, or at least it in a lengthy New York Times article, the discovery of this early primate from Meridian, Mississippi. To me, this is probably one of the most amazing discoveries. Now, we don't have the original material here. We don't even have examples of this material here. The material consists of teeth and bones, fragmentary, none of it articulated. This little guy, who, as you can tell from this illustration here, is a wee little thing, approximately 6 centimeters long, without the tail. So it's probably 5 to 6 inches long, 6 inches long with the tail. So cute little fellow, rather like a pygmy mouse lemur of sorts. But it was a type, it was from a member, it was a member of a family of primates called Amomiid primates, which had a long history in North America, and they became extinct about some 20-something million years ago. They're no longer in North America, but they had a long history, this family of primates in North America prior to that. But to me, this is iconic with respect to really cool things that are in the literature. And a lot of you don't know about it because our local newspapers never picked it up. Unfortunately, it's sad to say. I even called the Clarion Ledger. This was published in the New York Times in March 4th, 2008. New York Times, must be a big deal, right? Well, I let 2 weeks go by when I finally called the Clarion Ledger, and it had been out on the AP wire the whole time, and it never appeared in any of the local newspapers, to my knowledge. David, I see your hand raised.
Well, Chris Beard asked me for papers in Mississippi, to publicize this, and so I gave him Clarion Ledger, and I gave him a Brilliant Star, or whatever Brilliant papers considered. So Carnegie Institution had those papers and sent out the press release. They just did nothing.
Yeah.
But other papers from, from the East Coast to the West Coast covered it.
Picked up the story. It's a shame. It's a real shame. I thought about calling them again. No, it's a bit too long. Yeah, it's a pity. I guess what are you going to do, though, except complain about it, folks? No. Is anybody from the newspaper here? John, just 1 second. Did you have a comment about this specifically?
Yeah, question.
Yeah.
Just noting the generic name of the mouse, lemur.
Oh, yeah.
Does it refer to the philosopher Teilhard de Chardin?
Yes, who was also a paleontologist, a paleoanthropologist specifically, who worked on early fossil man. Yeah, he was a Catholic priest, cleric of some sort, and he's noted in the annals of paleoanthropology.
Now that's the way to sell the story.
Yeah, well, perhaps. Maybe we can get in a church bulletin today, St. Andrews. But yeah, Magnoliana, the species name, of course, is named for the state of Mississippi, which is the Magnolia State. The last 2 slides, I want to invite you all to explore Mississippi's paleontological past at other museums around the state. You've probably heard of many of these, but you may not have heard of the Artifact Shack. This is a private museum in Silverina, Mississippi, run by one of our special donors who've already mentioned twice in the show, Jeff McCraw, who could not be here today. Now, do we have time for questions? I'm going to leave it right there.